This is the Post Shift Podcast, a raw look at the hospitality industry. Hello, Post Shifters, and welcome to your Post Shift Podcast number 9. And I've got a very special guest for this one. Davin DeKergommeux from CanadianWhisky.org, Canadian Whisky, the potable expert. What else? Just everything. Canadian Whisky Awards. I'm very lucky. I've known Davin for a couple of years now, and I've really always looked up to the guy when he supported a spirit that a lot of people told him to stop. A really interesting story with him. I asked him a few questions that probably no one's ever heard before. I asked him some history tones. So if you're interested in Canadian whiskey, you're going to really love this episode. I really get to the nuts and bolts of who Davin DeKergommeux is, and I really appreciated sitting down with the guy. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I'm very lucky that I get to sit down with my idols and people that I've looked up to for many, many years and get to ask them some questions and just hang out, and I really appreciate all that. It's not on the tape, but Davin didn't enjoy the Dave Mitten episode because it was too loud. I'm going to keep working on getting that quality better, guys. I promise. I want you to keep listening. Thank you for all your support. I hope you enjoy this episode and enjoy your week. Well, how about you introduce yourself? Because like the people at home don't like. People at home want to. I'm going to explore a whole bunch of stuff with you.
Okay, well, I'm Davin DeKergommeux. I wrote the book Canadian Whisky, the new portable expert. I'm holding it up so you can see it. Actually, I'm not.
And you're in your second edition now, right?
It's the second edition, yeah. And it's gone into the second printing of the second edition.
Wow.
It seems to be doing fairly well.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in Canadian whiskey these days. And of course, the brands are stepping up with, some of the good whiskeys like we used to have in the old days.
Yeah.
And back in the 60s and 70s, Canadian whiskey was massive. And then it's kind of went alight in the 80s.
I always say that Canadian whiskey, like, because we have limited rules, you can either use the rules for good or evil. Mm-hmm. And because of the limited rules, if you want to sort of shirk the rules, you can. But if you really want to, like, I think 40 Creek and like your Wises and stuff like that, and Crown Royal and the big boys are now realizing that they can make some great whiskeys because they're not like constrained by rules.
Well, I think actually the Canadian whiskey rules are much stricter than American, for example.
You really think?
Well, in America, you can call it whiskey if it has 5% grain spirit and 95% cane spirit. Huh. I mean, it's light whiskey, but they have so many definitions that, honestly, a whiskey maker in America can do absolutely anything and still call it whiskey.
Wow.
But they don't have rules about making whiskey, except it has to have some grain in it. They have rules about naming whiskey. So you do whatever you want, Mr. Distiller, and then we'll tell you what name to put on it. You can call it bourbon, or you can call it rye, or you can call it light whiskey, or you can call it whiskey, or you can call it blended whiskey, whatever. But really, so it's kind of because our definition is very short, but it's also quite to the point.
Yeah.
Whereas in America, there are 35 different kinds of whiskey. And now with the new TTB rules, honestly, I never looked at it that way. I was shocked when I went into a bar in Waco, Texas, and to look at some of the whiskey there. And they had this whiskey, it was called Texas whiskey, and it was like 95%, cane spirit, made from sugar, but 5% whiskey. And I thought, like, Christ, this isn't whiskey. But yes, I went back, looked at the TTB rules, and they can make anything and call it. They can't call it bourbon, but they can call it whiskey. But it's just like when you think of Scotch, everybody thinks of single malt, but most Scotch whiskey is made from corn or wheat, and it's the same with Americans. Most people think of bourbon, but bourbon is only one of many, many, many different kinds of whiskey they make in the States. So I know we've got this idea is out there. It's in the lore that we don't have many rules in Canada, but the truth is our rules are much stricter than those in America.
I never looked at it that way.
Yeah.
Well, because I always look at it as like the same things, bourbon, rye, like the rules that surround bourbon, the rules that surround rye and stuff are so strict. Yeah. But looking at it the other direction is pretty good.
Yeah.
And so what are you working on right now? Can you say?
Yeah, I'm working on a new book. It's about distilling in Canada. It's really including all of the distilleries from coast to coast. And what they're doing, how they're doing it, what they're making. I'm really quite excited about it.
Nice.
But my goodness, Shawn, It's unbelievable how much work it is. And you know this because I know you tried to write this book.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's why I did it. That's why I waited so long to get started, because I figured Shawn's doing it.
Well, I'm writing my second book now, and I'm doing it with bartenders, which is 150 bartenders from across the country.
Oh, my goodness.
Sat down and spent an hour and a half today writing emails, and it's like wrangling cats.
It is. And you just wait, Shawn. You're going to get back the first edits, and 3 of those bartenders are going to have changed to a different bar.
Yeah.
And then the second edit's looking back, and 5 more will have moved. It's yeah. But you know what? This is the fun.
And I like just dealing with BC distilleries. Like, a lot of them don't have the website or an email or social media or anything.
I know.
But you walk in and you go to a liquor store, and there's like all these products from these, BC specific. It's like all these products from BC distilleries, and then you go and go, where'd you get this? Who reps this? No one reps it. They just they came to Victoria one week, like 6 months ago, and I bought 4 cases of stuff from them, and that was the last time I saw them or heard of them. And like I do not envy your job at all.
Well, I'm having a lot of fun. Blair Phillips and I are doing this together, so it makes it a lot more manageable.
Because while you're in Victoria, I'm guessing you're doing all the Vancouver Island distilleries.
Yeah, I'm well advanced past that now. The publisher has seen the manuscript, commented it's back, so now I'm doing edits. And oh my goodness, I have never had so many queries from a publisher. It looks like I'm doing my own fact checking too.
Yeah, I had to get a 3-month extension on my second book.
Oh, did you?
Because bartenders just weren't getting back to me. It was just like emailing them and just completely. Or you get bios and then you email them again, and then another 3 months passes before they get back to you again, and it's like wrangling cats.
Wrangling cats.
It's like wrangling cats. Yeah. So how'd you get into Canadian whiskey? Because I think it's one of those things everybody can say Davin was an overnight success, because I see like you put out the book, and then you've got the Canadian Whisky Awards at Victoria Whisky Fest, which have been super. Which year are you into for the Canadian Whisky Awards now? We've
finished 9 years.
Wow.
So year 10 is coming up.
Wow.
Next year in Victoria.
And you really, like what you were saying about Canadian whiskey coming into its own, like you backed a spirit that 9 years ago, did you have naysayers? Like that were like, why are you doing a whiskey awards for Canadian whiskey? Like even 9 years ago, this is, I think I just saw Dr. Don just celebrated 7 years at Wise's, or 8 years at Wise's. I think I just saw that on LinkedIn. What got you into Canadian whiskey? Like what sort of pushed you towards a category of spirit that is, especially a decade ago, was sorely misunderstood?
Yeah. Well, Shawn, I started with the Malt Maniacs. I started writing about whiskey in 1998. And it was all single malt Scotch. I was a Scotch snob and only single malts. And then we started the Malt Maniacs Awards. And everything was 100% blind, and we were shocked one year when the winning whiskey was not from Scotland. It was Japanese. And suddenly that kind of opened my eyes, that there's a lot more out there than just Scotland. And, and I was driving by these various distilleries in Canada, started getting interested in collecting information. And my daughter said, Dad, you're writing a book. And hadn't occurred to me, but then I gathered all the information and I started tasting it. But where I really kind of got my first respect for Canadian whiskey, because I had the same impression everybody else does, that it's light and, so whiskey.
Flavored vodka.
Yeah. Yeah. I was at a tasting in Las Vegas with people who I really respected and really looked up to. And, there were all these single malt scotches on free pour. Just take your glass and pour yourself as much as you want. And these guys were standing around drinking Canadian whiskey. And I thought, my goodness, are they drunk or what? But these were old Canadian whiskeys back from the days when Canadian whiskey they had these big, massive, robust whiskeys like Canadian Masterpieces and things like that. They're drinking all these old whiskeys. And I tried some and thought, holy crow, this is fabulous stuff that we're only just starting to get back to in Canadian whiskey now. And so I started doing research and so on, and I put the book together, and did the website and took off from there. I still love my bourbon. I still love my Scotch. I still love all these other whiskeys, and I have a great collection of Japanese whiskey at home that I bought when they were $65 a bottle.
Yeah, I think I just saw a friend in the UK, the new Japanese whiskey line, 4 bottles in the rope tied up ones, and I think it was £54,000 for 4 bottles. For 4 bottles of Japanese whiskey.
Well, I've got a lot of very valuable whiskey, but I don't sell it. I open it.
Yeah.
I used to have a rule: when my whiskey reaches a value of $1,000 a bottle, I break the seal just so I won't ever be tempted to auction it.
That's a good rule. I'm sure there's a lot of whiskey nerds out there just shuddering right now, going, "But you could have sold it." But yeah, $1,000. Like, how often do you get a chance to taste a $1,000 bottle of whiskey?
Or to sit there and pound it.
Yeah. So that was 1998. So Canadian Whisky is it CanadianWhisky.org?
Yeah, CanadianWhisky.org. Yeah.
So that started around the early, like around that 2000.
No, I started that in about 2010, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, did you write a book before Canadian Whisky?
No.
No. So Canadian Whisky.
That was my first book.
That was your first book.
Well, I contributed to quite a few books.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you go to the bookstores and look at the whiskey shelf, there almost always you can find 4 or 5 books that have my name in the back as a contributor. Yeah. Somebody else gets the author title on the front, but if you go in, you see that often many other people contribute to that book.
So what do you think the rise of the Canadian whisky is? What do you think in recent years? Like, sometimes I look, because we're in a sort of niche bubble, if you will. When like, we love Canadian whisky, and we want to champion it. And of course, that niche is very small compared to like your single malt heads and your Japanese whiskey guys and stuff like that. I still think there's still a long way to go before it's recognized. But I think probably Crown Royal Northern Harvest winning Whiskey of the Year a few years ago with Jim Murray definitely helped.
That helped a lot.
But what do you think why do you think people are coming back to Canadian whisky?
Well, I think it started with John Hall and 40 Creek. He had faith in what he was doing. He had faith in his whiskey, and he knew how to market it. Mm-hmm. We can produce the most wonderful whiskeys in the world. If people don't find out about them, they're not going to talk about them. So I think there are 2 things here. First of all, everybody's looking for the latest new thing. John Hall got out there and poured great Canadian whiskey for people to taste. He did not apologize for it. He had people taste it, and people liked it. People enjoyed it, and he personally became the face of the brand. He could do that because he owned the brand, And over a long period of time, he slowly built up a huge following, and he backed it up with whiskeys that really, really pleased people when they tasted them. People wanted to go back for more. There's that. There is the element of people wanting to be part of the latest thing. I think also it helped that, people started writing about Canadian whiskey. We started the Canadian Whisky Awards, and every year we would bring, 5 or 6 American journalists to the awards, because America is the biggest market. 75% of our whiskey is sold in the United States. And so we got people not necessarily selling them on Canadian whiskey, just getting them to know what it was about. I think it really helped that we had really influential drinks writers writing about it. It's great that Dave Broom is a big fan of Canadian whiskey. I mean, he really, really kind of gets it, and he understands where it came from as well. So I think it's just, this momentum has been mounting for Canadian whiskey.
And then, of course, you've got Dr. Don Littlemore from JP Wiser's, who sort of came on board at JP Wiser's and started creating some wicked, just incredible whiskies from JP Wiser's.
Yeah, although some of those whiskies are great. They really are.
Do you think the cask strength trend, because I know probably this year, but last year when I was a judge for the Canadian Whisky Awards, there was a whole section of cask strength, Canadians coming out as well. Do you think cask strength is going to be a next trend, or do you think it's like a nice little side gig? I
have to be honest, I'm not a big fan of cask strength whiskeys. I don't know why people need this massive hit from whiskey. It tastes better if you add a little bit of water to it anyway. I don't know. It's somehow, I think I'd rather taste a whiskey at 40% that I can savor and enjoy and suss out the different flavors and things like that. I don't think cask strength is going to be a big deal. I think it's Scotch people who are asking for cask strength, people who really would rather be drinking Scotch whiskey anyway, who are asking for cask strength. So, I mean, there are some, and some of them are enjoyable. But you take lot 40 cask strength, and if you really want to enjoy that whiskey, add some water.
Yeah,
that's my take on it. Okay, so I think.
I think. I'm sure you found it too. I think whiskey drinkers have always been very opinionated about how you should drink your whiskey, and they always poo-poo ice or poo-poo water or like go again, like say that you only should drink it some way. And I think for whiskey drinkers as a whole, it should be a personal thing.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people like to have a personal preference because it makes them feel that they appear knowledgeable. But the truth of the matter is, whiskey tastes good any way you drink it, And I saw somebody on Twitter the other day who was talking about having tasted some fabulously expensive Japanese whiskey in a highball, and it was it must
have blown up.
Yeah, but when I went to Tokyo one time, I was with this guy Hideo Yakamoto, is that his name? And he's the connoisseur in Japan. He took me to a bar and ordered Freugen soda. It's 50% Lafroig 10-year-old, 50% club soda. Oh my God, the flavor just pops with those bubbles.
Yeah,
it's I think that
Suntory's huge in Japan for doing kegged Suntory and soda, and it's on tap. Like you pour a beer pint, so you get your highball glass with ice.
Shawn, I did not know that.
Yeah, it is. Suntory highballs are huge.
Yeah,
and it's funny with with Japanese whiskey being so popular that the Japanese drink a lot more blended than they do single malts. Like Hibiki 12 is, I think, more popular than it is, and people think that it's a single malt. It's like, well, no, it's a blend of whiskeys. Like it's kind of interesting how it sort of flows. So with the new distillery book, how many distilleries are you sort of focusing on? Like how many well, you got a rough number?
It's way more than 150 now. The trouble is the number keeps changing, and the deadline doesn't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think there's 75 alone in BC with another 15 opening before the end of the year. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah, BC is sensational. Yeah. Alex Hamer. He took me into Legacy Liquors in Vancouver. Yeah. My goodness, it's remarkable how many BC distilleries they have on their shelves. Yeah. Something's happening in this province where they really support the local distilleries, and the result is fabulous spirits. But I know I was out to Sheringham and I tasted their full line, and they have the Seaside Gin, which I think is sensational. So I did buy a bottle, and my dad and I have been sitting here drinking this Seaside Gin, and then I see it wins
best contemporary. Yeah, it's kind of insane. That I work really closely with the guys at Sheringham, so it was kind of nuts when they said that they got best contemporary. I'm just like, holy, because we're working on another project with the Akavit right now.
Oh yeah.
So it's nuts that BC is sort of showing, and it's funny because like you look at 75 distilleries, at least 4 to 5 SKUs per distillery. So you're just like, it's hundreds upon hundreds of different liqueurs and amaros and like spirits and everything like that. And so BC is a difficult beast to control when it comes to, like, I'm trying to do an episode every week of tasting BC spirits. We did absinthe last week, which was 4 absinthes. And so it's one of those things is like next week I'm doing liqueurs, and I know how many liqueurs are available in BC alone. Yeah. So like Sunshine liqueur from Shelter Point will be in there and stuff like that. But before you got into all the whiskey and everything, what was your day job? I'm curious if anyone's ever asked you this, because
no one has really ever asked me this. I have this great series of drinks articles that are coming together in my head based on the 17 years I spent with Canadian International Development Agency, which is a government agency that does like poverty reduction in the developing world, in the third world. And as a result of that, I have tasted spirits in Tanzania, Vanuatu, in the Muslim world, in all over the place. I think I've been just about every place except Antarctica and taste it like pisco in Peru and things like that. And man, so that's what I did. I spent a lot of time for 17 years. Spent a lot of time on the road, just visiting these countries, seeing what was going on, and reporting back to Ottawa.
It definitely explains your giving demure. Like I find you as one of the most giving without expecting anything in return sort of people in the industry. Like, you just do it because you love it, and you include people who love the same things you love without expecting anything in return.
Well, it is so kind of you to say that. I'm glad that comes across. That's how I think of Alex.
Yeah.
Alex, same thing.
Yeah, it's just, I think, I've always enjoyed doing tons of stuff with you. And I can't even remember the first time we met, to be honest with you. It's been a couple of years because I think it was 2019, so 2015, I think we did the big Canadian Whiskey session at Tails. And that was like the first big, like, and you did a few activations on top of that.
Yeah.
So, and that's where it's kind of funny. Like, I look back and look at Canadian Whiskey, and I know that 2015 was when I opened up Olo as well, which was a big Canadian whiskey. We did a lot of Canadian whiskey bars there. And it's funny how Tails is now, like, every year scrambling to do at least a couple of Canadian whiskey activations.
Yeah.
And Dave Mitten's probably a big force behind that, because Canadian whiskey in the US is huge. And they're finally starting to see how much money you can spend and get return.
Yeah.
I know Dave's been on the road. Like, the activation that he did in San Antonio was just insane. Like, insane. Like, they got a yurt. They built a yurt, and people hung out in a yurt with Lot 40 and Weisses.
Doesn't surprise me.
And so, they basically packed it up now, so they take it on the road everywhere. So they just do it. That's what Dave's job is now, is just taking it through.
Well, he's got some absolutely fabulous whiskeys to pour for people.
Yeah.
These are whiskeys just like the ones we used to get in the 70s and 80s, or 60s and 70s.
Well, I think a lot of people think, and I know that you were the one that dispelled this for me, is that I always assumed Canadian whiskey got big in the US during Prohibition.
No.
And you want to tell the story about this one? Because I think that a lot of people believe that we were shipping everything over the border and from Windsor into Detroit and
Well, Canadian whiskey was already huge in the United States. It was the best-selling whiskey in the United States since the Civil War, 1865. And so, yes, when Prohibition came along, we shipped a lot of whiskey to the States, but it was much, much less than we had been shipping before. Wow. And a lot of Canadian distilleries went bankrupt or went out of business because of Prohibition, because America had been our biggest market. So even though they were still drinking a lot of Canadian whiskey, it was like, 10% of what they'd been drinking before Prohibition?
Well, and that's why if you go to Georgia, I think you told me the story too, is that if you go to like Georgia and some of the southern states, like where Crown Royal is massive, Crown Royal does special modelings just for like southern state markets, which just blows my, I literally wants to do a southern trip just so I can try and find some special bottlings that you don't see outside of like some random states in the south. Where do you see Canadian whiskey going for the next like 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think big flavor is still, on the rise. We're going back to the big flavors we used to have. Rye definitely is a leader. The flavor
of spicy.
Spicy rye is definitely leading the way. I don't know. I think that people are coming to acknowledge that Canadian whiskey can be every bit as big as single malt Scotch, every bit as big as bourbon, and people are trying it. I think people now are more interested in trying other kinds of whiskey. So when you go to Texas, they'll have like 15 different Crown Royals on the bar. Like if you go, you walk. I remember that I walked into a hotel bar in Waco. They had 15 different Crown Royals on the bar.
Wow.
And then I went into another bar, which is a specialty whiskey bar, and guess what? Sitting there was a bottle of Lot 40 from 20 years ago that had still not been opened.
What?
And I thought, Mitten, get your ass to Waco. Because that bottle really was well worth having. And I think and I don't know if they were just saving it or what, but
saving it just for you.
They must have been, and so we do have witnesses.
Wow,
that was pretty good whiskey.
Wow. So what have you got planned for? Can you let me know any plans you got for the big 10-year anniversary for the Canadian Whisky Awards?
It's going to be special. It's going to be bigger than has been in the past. We're kind of revamping the whole Canadian Whisky Awards because the Canadian whisky scene has changed a lot. It used to be we had awards for export only because a lot of Canadian whiskies are made for the U.S. market and for nobody else. But we're trying to revamp it, and I'm trying to turn it into. I think it's ready for the next stage, ready for the next step.
And why not do it at the 10-year anniversary?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So all you do these days is just write? Is that pretty much your
I'm writing I'm writing like crazy. I feel like I'm in a cave.
Yeah.
All I'm doing is sitting at my computer and tapping, and my wife is incredibly patient, but I think that patience is wearing thin.
It sounds like my wife. Because I'm at school as well, so I I'm going from 8 in the morning till at least 9 o'clock every night, 7 days a week. So
that's tough.
My wife is extremely an understanding woman. And with our daughter, she's a very understanding little lady as well. Yeah. So, any thoughts on anything before we cut it up? No?
Well, I'm really encouraged by the growth of the small whiskey makers in Canada. There are a few in Canada, quite a few that aren't quite ready yet, but there are others that are getting there, like two brewers in Yukon.
Yes.
Fabulous whiskey. Lowe and McKinnon.
Yeah.
Lowe and McKinnon, that chocolate malt.
Yeah.
If anybody has not tasted that chocolate malt, take my word, just buy a whole bottle.
Yeah.
Okay. Shelter Point. Shelter Point's
They're
great.
definitely coming on their own now.
Yeah. And that rye whiskey that they bought.
Yeah.
It's fabulous.
Yeah.
Sean, isn't that good?
That cask strength? Yeah, it was tasty.
I love the new rye flavors that Stock and Barrel have.
Yep.
Really great. And Dillon's is getting some of those same rye flavors as well. So I'm very encouraged by that, but I'm also very encouraged by what's happening at Hiram Walker Distillery because they came in at exactly the right time. And, Don Livermore has just taken over where John Hall left off. And he's bringing out these massive big whiskeys, and he speaks about them so intelligently.
Yeah, and eloquently.
Yep. And people really are getting it. And people are just waiting to taste those whiskeys. I'm glad, too, to see that prices are starting to go up a little bit, get a little bit more respect, But at the same time, you can buy a 40-year-old Canadian Club for $300 or a 40-year-old Glenfiddich for $6,000. And guess what? They're pretty much equally good. Not the same, but equally good. So.
In their own rights, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you like the trend of the older Canadian whiskies being released?
Yes, I do. I like these older whiskeys, but some of the younger blended whiskeys are just as sensational.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to know a whiskey that is just fabulous, you can recommend it to anybody. It does not have an age statement on it. Gooderham and Worts.
Yeah. Take
Gooderham and Worts any day of the week. That's a whiskey that when no one's around, I'm sipping. It's a wonderfully, tasty, beautifully made whiskey. And he has, every year he's come up with a variation on Gooderham and Worts that is just as good as the original and that much better. Yeah. So, this is something that's pretty special.
Yeah, I think Dr. Don's definitely taken us into the next decade of leading the way in Canadian whiskey.
Yeah, he's changing the way people think about Canadian whiskey.
Yeah, he is a silver ton devil when it comes to the Canadian whiskey. Like you go do 1 7-0 with him, you just give up every other whiskey and just drink Canadian after sitting in a session with him. He's just amazing.
Yeah, really.
I really appreciate sitting down with you. I won't say idolize, but it's always the one great thing about doing the podcast is I get to sit down with people who, whether we have a friendship or I idolize from afar, I get an opportunity to sit down and just chat.
Well, we're simpatico, Sean. Before you go, tell people I have a book. It's called Canadian Whisky, the New Portable Expert on Amazon, in most bookstores.
Yeah, you got to get it if you want to learn anything about Canadian whiskey. I learned about the whole family feud for Gooderham and Worts from your book. I remember literally sitting in a bathtub reading your book. So yes, go out and get Canadian whiskey. Watch out. When's the next book coming out?
I think it will be available right after Christmas.
Okay.
Not before Christmas, right after Christmas.
Perfect. So get people gift cards for their local bookstore so they can go get Davin's next book. Go and check out CanadianWhisky.org if you want to learn about the awards, especially. Check out who won gold medals and everything, so you can add those to your collection. And I think this is probably going to. I think this is episode 10 of Post Shift Podcast. So I will edit something at the end, and I really appreciate sitting down with you, buddy.
Thank you, Shawn.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. I'll see you next week. Thanks, Post Shifters, and thank you very much for Davin DeKergommeux sitting down and chatting to me. I hope you really enjoyed that episode number 9 of the Post Shift podcast. If you get a chance, please rate me on your iTunes podcast, number 5, if you like the content and like what we're going on. I really appreciate everybody's support and truly, truly grateful for anybody who even listens to this. So thank you very much. I will keep continuing on, and I hope to see you next week. Bye.